Hey, this is Matthew with BI Polar. In today's data culture video, we're going to take a closer look at the fact that there is no one-size-fits-all approach for managed self-service BI applications because every app is its own unique snowflake. Let's take a look. You may be familiar with the saying that every snowflake is unique, that no two snowflakes are identical. I don't know if this is true or not, but it is true for BI solutions. Even though every snowflake kind of looks like every other snowflake, a lot of self-service BI solutions will look similar, but each one has its own different characteristics and capabilities, and this is something that we need to take into consideration and to recognize that there is no one-size-fits-all solution for every app or for every organization. In earlier videos in this series, we looked at a very high level at how Microsoft Finance had developed a model where they have discipline at the core and flexibility at the edge, allowing a central BI team to do the things that matter the most, while still enabling finance analysts to work with that central solution and its data and data from other sources to not be blocked by IT's schedules and priorities. We also looked at this graphic from the Power BI adoption framework. And in this graphic, we can see that there are some solutions and some data domains that require more and tighter controls, and there are other solutions and other data domains that require fewer or looser controls. And in this diagram, there's a line in the middle that is labeled consistent criteria and responsibilities. And as I mentioned in that previous video, the link to which will be in the description down below, the position of this line is not important, the label is. The thing that's important is that there are clearly defined criteria and responsibilities so that anyone who is building an application can understand what they are allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do, and as the application evolves over time, how do those responsibilities or how do those criteria apply in different ways? During our series introduction, I mentioned that a lot of the content in this series, in these videos, will be things that I have observed in my work with successful Power BI customers. And for the rest of this video, I actually want to show a few examples and patterns that have emerged from the hundreds of conversations that I've had over the past few years with customers that are being successful with managed self-service BI at global scale, very often with a small central BI team and a large community of authors, both professional and citizen BI authors as well. Let's begin by taking a look at a pattern. So this diagram is something that I've put together that represents the most common pattern that I see these successful enterprise Power BI customers following. And you'll notice that this is similar to things that we've looked at in the past. What I want to highlight is that typically inside an organization, there are multiple tiers or rings or layers of BI application, each one of which will have different criteria, different responsibilities, and different capabilities. If we look at the broadest outer circle, most of the customers that I work with have the ability for their information workers. And this could be an analyst who works with data day in and day out. It could be the store manager working in a retail environment. Essentially, anyone that wants to make data-driven decisions to do his or her job, they will get access to Power BI Desktop with the resources that they need to use it for personal BI. So imagine you're working in Power BI Desktop, you can connect to data, you can open existing shared data sets or analysis services models or similar semantic models, so you can work with your own data or with data that has been curated and prepared for you. But that's all that you do. You use it to make your own decisions, and there's no sharing. You're doing it for yourself. The next layer, a little closer in, is what I've labeled as team business intelligence. And this basically comes down to organizations that have a pro license issued to the author and to the readers, so that if I am developing content for my team or for a group that I work closely with, as a business user who is a problem domain expert, I may not be a technology expert and my reports may not be super pretty or super functional, but I can get data, I can prepare it and present it in ways that I can deliver value for my team or for my larger group. One of the things that I want to point out here is that I see customers using Power BI licensing as a differentiation point. If you think about licensing today, and I'd like to point out, A, this is my personal YouTube channel, and B, I am not an expert on Power BI licensing, so if I misstate anything or if things change after the data or after the video is published, rather, this is your disclaimer. Look up the official licensing information. Don't listen to me. What I see organizations doing is they're essentially using the consumer license requirement for publishing to Power BI shared capacity as an enforcement mechanism and as a leveling mechanism for this sort of tiered approach. If I am developing for 5 or 10 users, the licenses, the pro licenses for those 5 or 10 users will probably come out of my budget. If I am developing for 10,000 users or 50,000 users or even 1,000 users, odds are I don't want to get pro licenses for every user just so they can read my reports. And this means that I would need to publish my report to premium capacity so that those consumers don't each need a pro license. And this is where the department tier comes in for the diagram that we're looking at. Instead of having a pro license for the author and a pro license for the reader, we have a pro license for the author, very typically small number of authors compared to the number of readers, and the organizations will typically have defined a set of criteria to say this is what justifies an application getting published into premium capacity, but they also have criteria that says, unlike publishing to shared capacity that Microsoft manages, and if you have something that isn't optimized, it doesn't really affect the rest of our BI solution. When you're publishing to premium capacity today, a poorly designed application can impact the performance or scale or availability of other applications that are deployed to that premium capacity. And this means that most of these enterprise organizations will have additional checks and gates that an author needs to go through before they are allowed to publish their application. This may mean having a structured formal workflow or change control board where the author will submit their PBIX file and it is checked by a team of experts or the people in that center of excellence, checked for data model design, checked for the appropriate granularity, checked for data privacy or other criteria, compliance or governance or what have you. But typically, for the departmental tier in this diagram, it's harder to have your application meet that bar, and there are typically higher gates that you need to go through, or a higher barrier that you need to get over before you were allowed to do this. And again, in Power BI today, this often means before you were allowed to publish to premium capacity. And then at the center of this diagram, we have typically the smallest number of applications, but also the most important applications. And in most organizations, these are developed by a central BI team, either embedded inside a business unit or managed by IT. There is no right way to do it. It's the way that your organization is structured that typically determines this. But these are developed as professional software applications. They have fully managed data sources. They have application lifecycle management. They have change control. They will typically have a change board and a way to submit requests and changes and to prioritize those requests. So a lot of it really comes down to having the outer tiers be self-service, with more and more management coming in, that managed self-service BI side, the closer to the center you get. But in most global enterprise organizations that I work with, building their data estate using Power BI, that center tier is professionally developed by BI and data professionals, and it's managed just like the data warehouse and BI applications would be if they were developed using analysis services or other pro BI tools. Next, let's take a look at another example of this diagram, or another instance of this diagram. You'll notice that the format is the same, but the labels have changed. For this diagram, I've actually chosen an example from one customer that I worked with a few years ago, and am describing how their approach to managed self-service BI maps onto this general pattern. For this organization, they have a large set of distributed users that are not traditionally what you would think of as information workers. So they're primarily working with their customers directly, but they also have both distributed and centralized teams of excellence, or it's the network of excellence, as we mentioned during our community and COE video. But they have multiple levels at which people could potentially work with data. And what they've done is they've said that any single user inside the organization can work with data that the central teams have made available, or that have been made available by people at the inner tiers who have the ability to create shared or certified data sets in the Power BI service. This basically means that any one of their employees, doesn't matter who they are or where they work or what their job is, if they ask for it, they will get access to Power BI Desktop and permissions to connect to the appropriate data sets in the service, anybody at all. Now, there are some departments inside this organization that are more vital to the strategic success than others. These tend to have more resources that have been made available. So more training, more information targeted for their purposes in the portal, and more of these curated central data sets that have been made available to them. So they think about these departments differently. And it also means that when people from those departments are requesting work from a central BI team, that they can get access to it more quickly, their requests are prioritized. They also have the concept of power users. These power users tend to be more what we would traditionally think of as information workers. So they're people who are more likely to be working in an office as information as their primary output, rather than working with customers as their daily core responsibility. But these people tend to have more skills, they tend to have more tools, so they might be working with Tabular Editor or DAX Studio in addition to Power BI Desktop, and they tend to have like the high-end computers, they might have 32 gigs of RAM instead of 8 or similar things. Basically, it's a recognition of the fact that they will have higher demands and have the capability to produce higher value for the company as a whole. And because of this, the organization gives them more tools to work with. But at the central core, there's what the stakeholder from this company described it as, this is our hardcore IT. So they have a more traditional IT organization with a BI center of excellence, where they hire professional developers, they have database administrators, they have people with years and years of experience building data and BI solutions, and they will both work with the self-service BI users and develop solutions for distribution across the organization. Let's take a closer look at that. Let's actually take this and blow out that center core to see sort of a double click or a closer look inside that hardcore IT center of this diagram. As we blow this up, and as we look closer and closer into this central core, we'll see that this one organization has 4 different tiers inside that one central core, and they really represent the reality of how an agile and mature organization thinks about data and thinks about building solutions on top of that data. The simplest and most organic level, the lowest level on the left, is exploration. So typically they've gotten an idea either from some of their self-service BI users or maybe working with their self-service BI users as part of a 2-week sprint. But basically they will go through and they will say, we've got an idea, let's spend some time on it and see if the idea has legs. Let's see if this is worth building on and investing in more. And very typically, the data will be in unsupported sources. So it's coming from SharePoint lists, it's coming from Excel, or it's a mashup of unmanaged and managed sources. And the exploration work is a quick iteration in Power BI Desktop or in Excel. And at the end of the sprint, or at the end of a sprint or two, they might throw it away and say, there's not really anything here to invest in. They might hand it back to that self-service BI user and basically say, this could be valuable to you, but we don't see the value for the larger organization. Or they could say, we're going to take this and we're going to build on it. If they do choose to build on it, that next stop is what I've labeled as promotion. So as they're going down the path to maturity, they will take that exploratory solution and they will set up a gateway with scheduled refresh. So they will make it so they can publish it up to a shared workspace rather than the personal workspace where that exploratory solution probably lived. They might do some theming or branding to make sure that it aligns with the corporate colors and logos, but it's probably still based on the Excel or SharePoint list or what have you. And at this point, again, they have a go, no-go decision. Do they take this and build on it more? Or is this something that doesn't need more evolution? It doesn't need more growth to be successful. The third stage in this growth cycle is what I've labeled as preparation. They're basically preparing for the final production deployment. During this stage, they will take those ad hoc data sources and operationalize them. So put it into an Azure SQL DB database or incorporate it into the central data warehouse, whatever makes sense for this data and for this solution. But as they're doing this, they're making it so that the data source is as reliable as it needs to be for that final production application. And they're doing things like documentation. They're putting together training for it. They're identifying owners for the data, the processes, the application itself. So who is the technical data steward? Who is the business data steward? They're identifying all of the people who will be responsible for this in its full end-to-end life cycle. And then the final stage is they will operationalize those applications where it makes sense. So here they will have an SLA. It will be in a production workspace that is monitored and overseen by their IT or Power BI admin team. It gets that full set of support resources. And at this point, the cycle can begin again and again, or honestly, the cycle could begin again at any point, because this is just a path that each one of these applications can go through. And whether the application stops at phase 1 or phase 2 or phase 3 or makes it all the way to phase 4, they're all viable end states because not every application needs to be a fully supported production application. Any one of them could have value from existing in any one of these phases. And the great thing is, there are well-defined criteria and requirements to say this is what justifies moving up to the further to the right stage that ends up being more costly over time to maintain. Is it going to deliver the value that justifies having support and SLA and all of these resources assigned to it? If it does, we do it. If it doesn't, we don't. And this comes down to the acknowledgement that for any organization and any solution, as you move from a less mature to a more mature, from a less managed to a more managed state, the barrier to make that transition gets higher and higher and higher. And it's really up to your organization. It's up to each enterprise that is building that data culture and implementing their version of managed self-service BI to say what those criteria are. And there's one consistent theme that I hear from all of the successful companies that I work with, and that is that they don't take for granted that what they think is true is actually true. Each one of these organizations will have a central team of responsible parties that are monitoring, that are overseeing, and that are tracking over time to make sure that the right people are using the data, that the usage is what we expect, that the effort that goes into maintaining and having the well-established ownership for these production applications, that it is justified. And at the same time, these organizations are also looking at the full set of reports and workspaces and apps that are developed and deployed in the Power BI service, because they realize that even though there are some applications that will come in through their processes, that viral adoption effect, especially for organizations where they're using Office 365 E5 licensing, where every user has whatever license they need, which is more common than you might think, in situations like this, where people aren't always explicitly assigned licenses and having to jump through the gates that we looked at in the earlier video, for those organizations, understanding where is that viral growth happening. If they see an application that goes from 5 monthly active users this month to 100 monthly active users next month to 1,000 the month after, that's going to get their attention, and these successful, mature organizations will reach out to the owner or the author of that application to understand what it is, what it does, what the growth is, and whether or not it should be brought in to be part of this growth cycle, whatever growth cycle and operationalization path that this organization has defined. So in this video, we looked at both a general pattern and a specific pattern that successful Power BI enterprise organizations have used. The key thing that I'd like you to take away from this is that, first of all, there's no one-size-fits-all for applications inside an organization of any size, but also the examples that we've shown here are just that. They are examples that you can learn from, but there is no one-size-fits-all for managed self-service BI either. I hope this was valuable. Sorry it ran so long, but hopefully it was worth your time. We'll see you next week.